The day they laughed at him, he had a 7-year-old girl on his hip and a diaper bag on his shoulder. Not a briefcase, not a gym bag. A diaper bag, the kind with cartoon giraffes on the side, because Zoe had been terrified of the dark lately and insisted on carrying her stuffed elephant everywhere. And the elephant needed a bag, and the bag happened to be the only thing with a shoulder strap left in the apartment after the move. His name was Tristan Cole, 38 years old, 6 feet even, lean in the way that men who forget to eat get lean. Not the way men who train get lean. He had a quiet face. The kind people looked past in grocery stores and forgot at dinner parties. Brown eyes that didn't give much away. Hands that were too still for a man his age. He hadn't planned to bring Zoe, his sister was supposed to watch her. But Mara had called that morning with a migraine that sounded real and apologies that sounded genuine. And Tristan had looked at the clock and looked at his daughter still in her pajamas eating dry cereal from a coffee mug, and he'd made a decision that felt small at the time. He'd dress her. He'd take her along. It was just an interview. Except it wasn't really an interview. It was a tryout, the kind that happened in a room with a padded floor and fluorescent lights, and about 15 other men who looked like they'd been engineered in a lab specifically to make other men feel inadequate. Tristan stood in the doorway of the 34th floor training facility at Callaway Global Solutions and understood immediately that he had miscalculated something, not his skills, never that. He'd miscalculated how this was going to look. The facility coordinator, a woman in a charcoal blazer named Adrian who wore her efficiency-like body armor, glanced at Zoe and then at Tristan with an expression that people use when they're trying to be polite about something they find absurd. "Mr. Cole," she said carefully, "the tryout is today." "I know," Tristan said. "This is my daughter. She'll sit quietly." Adrian looked at Zoe. Zoe looked back at Adrian with the calm, unblinking seriousness that 7-year-olds deploy when they sense they're being assessed. She was holding her elephant, a gray stuffed thing named Captain, for reasons Tristan had never fully understood, pressed against her chest like a talisman. "She won't be a problem," Tristan said. Adrian pressed her lips together and nodded, because what else could she say, and gestured for him to find a place along the wall. The room was wide, with industrial windows overlooking downtown. Afternoon light came in sideways and made everyone look harder and more defined than they probably were. The other candidates stood in clusters, men in their late 20s and early 30s, most of them visibly trained, the kind of physique that comes from years of deliberate, dedicated work. Several had military haircuts. A few wore shirts that fit them the way shirts are supposed to fit when you've spent a serious portion of your life making sure shirts fit like that. Tristan wore a gray pullover and dark pants. He looked like someone's accountant. He set Zoe down in a folding chair near the wall, handed her the bag, and told her quietly that she could draw if she wanted. She pulled out a notebook and started drawing without asking questions. That was one of the things about Zoe. She had a particular gift for reading rooms. "Hey!" The voice came from his left. Tristan turned. The man was large, not just tall, but wide in the particular way that suggests the weight room is less a hobby and more a religion. He had a jaw that looked load-bearing and arms that tested the structural integrity of his sleeves. He was looking at Tristan with an expression caught between amusement and something less generous. "You actually here for the tryout?" "I am," Tristan said. The man, whose name Tristan would later learn was Garrett, smiled. Not an unfriendly smile, exactly. More the kind of smile that contains an entire verdict. "Brought your kid?" My sitter canceled. Garrett glanced back at 2 of the other candidates. Something passed between them. A shared understanding, a small private joke that didn't require words. "Right on," Garrett said and turned away. Tristan didn't say anything. He'd learned a long time ago that the most powerful response to being underestimated was patience. Not silence exactly. Patience. Silence was about withholding. Patience was about waiting for the right moment, knowing that the moment would come, knowing you'd be ready for it when it did. The tryout coordinator was a man named Harlan Voss. He was maybe 55, silver-haired, built like a retired offensive lineman, still carrying the size but wearing it more loosely now. He had the particular bearing of someone who had spent decades around physical danger and come out the other side without drama about it. He looked at the group assembled in front of him and took a long, measuring moment. "I run security for Marcus Callaway," Harlan said, no preamble. "Mr. Callaway has received credible threats over the past 4 months. My current team is solid, but I need one more person at the close protection level. That means you're with him. That means you're thinking before I finish thinking. That means you're never the most noticeable person in the room, but you're always the most dangerous." He paused. "We're going to do a few assessments today. Situational awareness first. Then we're going to do some contact work, because in this job, contact is sometimes what happens, and I want to see how each of you handles it." He looked around the room. His eyes moved slowly, professionally, the way people look when they're actually seeing things rather than just looking at them. They landed on Tristan, stayed there one beat longer than the others. Then he moved on. The situational awareness portion was a written scenario test, a packet of materials, a hypothetical environment, 12 questions, 25 minutes. The candidates spread out across folding tables. Tristan sat down, set a juice box next to his packet for Zoe, and read the first question. The scenario involved a private event, a compromised egress route, 2 identified threats, 1 principal with mobility limitations, and a crowd of 400. The questions were layered. Not just what do you do first, but why, and what's the cost of that choice, and what's your contingency if the contingency fails. Tristan had spent 6 years as a protective intelligence analyst for a defense contracting firm that didn't advertise its services. Before that, 3 years in the Army, not combat arms, which surprised people when they found out, but intelligence. He'd spent time in places where being the least noticeable person in the room wasn't a preference but a survival strategy. He'd learned to read environments the way some people read books, fluidly, continuously, without having to stop and sound out the words. He finished the packet in 14 minutes, went back and checked twice, sat quietly. On his left, Garrett was still writing at the 20-minute mark, pressing his pen into the paper with the concentration of a man building something. Harlan collected the packets without comment. Zoe looked up from her notebook. She'd drawn what appeared to be a horse, except it had 6 legs, which she explained to Tristan in a whisper was because 6 was better than 4. He nodded seriously because she was probably right. The contact work came after a short break. Harlan explained that they'd do controlled scenarios in pairs, simulated close protection situations where one person played the aggressor and one played the detail. No full contact, he said, but enough contact to see how each candidate moved and what they knew. The pairing wasn't random. Harlan chose. He paired Tristan with Garrett. There was a moment. Tristan felt it without looking for it, where the room understood what was happening and made a collective decision about how it was going to end. He saw it in the way the other candidates shifted their weight. He heard it in the small sound Garrett made, something between a laugh and a breath. He even saw it in Adrian, who was standing near the door with her clipboard and whose expression had taken on the careful neutrality of someone watching something they think might be embarrassing. Zoe had put down her notebook. She was watching her father. He didn't look at her. Not yet. Harlan set the scenario. Garrett was the approaching threat, moving towards a simulated principal, a chair with a jacket on it, which was not trying to be realistic but was realistic enough. Tristan was the detail. He had to read the approach and respond appropriately. In real close protection, appropriately often meant de-escalation, positioning verbal commands. Only if those failed did it mean contact. "Whenever you're ready," Harlan said to Garrett. Garrett rolled his neck. He was the kind of man who'd done a lot of these scenarios. You could tell by the way he set his feet before he started moving, deliberate and professional, not showing off. He gave Tristan a look that was almost respectful, almost an acknowledgement that whatever happened next, it was business. Then he started moving. What people who'd never done this kind of work didn't understand was that the most important thing that happens in a confrontation happens before the confrontation. It happens in the reading, in the 3 or 4 seconds before anyone's hands are involved, when the environment is still telling you everything you need to know if you're willing to listen. Most people weren't trained to listen. They were trained to react, and reacting meant always being one beat behind. Tristan didn't react. He read. Garrett was experienced, but he telegraphed. Slightly, the way anyone telegraphs when they're performing rather than actually trying to hurt someone. A lean in the right shoulder, a shift of weight to the outside foot. Tristan saw it the way you see a word you already know on a page, instantly, without effort, without having to work backward from the letters. He moved once. One movement, a lateral step left, a redirect of Garrett's extended arm, using Garrett's own forward momentum as the mechanism. It wasn't a throw exactly. It was more like a very polite, very firm conversation with physics, a suggestion that things were going to go differently than planned, delivered in the language of mechanics rather than force. Garrett went down. Not hard. Tristan controlled the descent the way you control something you don't want to break, because Garrett hadn't actually done anything wrong. He was just in the wrong pairing on the wrong day. He hit the mat and lay there for a half second with the particular expression of a man recalibrating. The room was very quiet. Tristan stepped back. His breathing was even. His hands were at his sides. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't shifted his expression, hadn't done anything except move once and then stop moving. The whole thing had taken maybe 2 seconds. In the folding chair near the wall, Zoe had both hands pressed over her mouth. Her eyes were very wide. She was staring at her father with an expression that was hard to read. Not fear, not exactly pride, something in between. The complicated feeling of seeing a person you thought you completely knew suddenly reveal a room inside themselves you didn't know existed. Garrett sat up slowly. He looked at his hands. Then he looked at Tristan. "What was that?" he said. It wasn't an accusation, it was a genuine question. "Crab variant," Tristan said, modified for close protection. "Minimize space, control the principal's sight line, neutralize without escalating." He paused. "You telegraphed left." Garrett stared at him for another moment. Then he nodded, and the nod had weight in it. The nod of a man who respected what he'd just experienced, even if it had not gone the way he'd expected. Harlan was watching Tristan. Had been watching him the whole time, Tristan suspected, but watching differently now, not with assessment, exactly, more with recognition. The expression of someone looking at something that matches a picture they had in their mind. "Where did you train?" Harlan asked. "Army, first. Then privately. I spent 6 years doing protective intelligence work for a firm called Larchmont Group." Harlan went still in a particular way. "I know Larchmont. I figured you might. Who ran your division?" Sandra Weil. Harlan's expression shifted by exactly 1 degree, which from Harlan was apparently equivalent to another man's jaw dropping. "Sandra ran you?" "For 4 years." A silence. Harlan looked at the floor briefly, then back at Tristan. "Sandra Weil is the best protective intelligence mind I've encountered in 30 years of this work." "I know," Tristan said. "She'll probably tell you she was wasted on me. She says that about everyone. It's how she shows affection." Something happened in Harlan's face that wasn't quite a smile, but was in the neighborhood. He turned and looked at Garrett, who was on his feet now, brushing off his pants. "You okay?" Harlan asked. "Fine," Garrett said. He glanced at Tristan. "Yeah, I'm fine." The rest of the tryout continued. Tristan went through the remaining scenarios with the quiet economy he'd applied to the first one. Not showy. Not trying to prove anything beyond what was asked. He watched the other candidates more than he watched himself, which was another thing Sandra Weil had taught him. Your awareness of your environment is always more important than your awareness of your own performance. At one point, during a scenario break, Zoe raised her hand. Adrian, who had been standing near the wall, looked at her. "Yes? Is my dad doing good?" Zoe asked. Adrian blinked, then carefully, "Yes, I think he is." Zoe nodded as if confirming something she'd already suspected. She went back to her drawing. It was 4 o'clock by the time Harlan gathered everyone near the center of the room. The light had changed, softer now, less direct, the city beyond the windows turning from silver to amber. Tristan stood with his hands in his pockets. Zoe stood beside him because she'd gotten tired of the chair and he'd let her come stand with him, which he was fairly sure wasn't standard tryout protocol, but which also didn't seem to be stopping anything. "I want to be straightforward with you," Harlan said. "This position requires a specific combination of things that isn't easy to find. Technical skill is part of it, but the larger part, and the part that's harder to teach, is judgment. Knowing when to move and when not to. Knowing what you're actually looking at versus what it looks like you're looking at." He paused. "Most of you have the physical side. Some of you have the situational piece. What I need is someone who has both without having to think about having both." He looked at Tristan. "Mr. Cole, I'd like to speak with you privately." There was a sound in the room, not quite a sound, more the absence of sound that happens when people decide not to say anything. Garrett was looking at the floor. A few of the other candidates exchanged glances. Nobody said anything uncharitable. Whatever had happened on the mat had shifted something in the room's understanding of what was possible, and even the people who were disappointed were being decent about it. Adrian was watching Zoe. Zoe was watching Harlan. Tristan put a hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Give me 2 minutes," he said. "Okay," she said. She held up her notebook, showing him the 6-legged horse. "I gave him a name." "What did you name him?" "Sergeant," she said. Tristan looked at the horse. "That's a good name," he said. He followed Harlan to the far side of the room near the windows. The city spread out below them, and in this light from this height, it looked like something assembled with care, each piece placed with intention. "Sandra Weil told me something once," Harlan said without looking at him. "She said the best protective detail people have a quality she called negative presence. They occupy space without announcing themselves. They're the thing that isn't noticed until it's the most important thing in the room." He turned. "You have that. Sandra would probably also tell you I spent too long sitting behind a desk analyzing threats instead of putting myself in front of them," Tristan said. "That's not a deficit," Harlan said. "That's the rarest possible combination." He looked at him steadily. "The position pays well. There are hours that are unreasonable. Mr. Calloway travels frequently. There will be nights away from home." Tristan was quiet for a moment. "I have a daughter," he said. The words came out simply, without apology. "Her mother isn't in the picture. I'm the picture." Any arrangement we make has to have room for that. Harlan didn't blink. You'd need reliable childcare infrastructure. I have it, Tristan said. Today was an anomaly. Harlan looked past him at Zoe, who was showing Adrian the six-legged horse with considerable seriousness. Adrian was bent slightly at the waist, examining it with an expression that suggested she was being won over against her professional judgment. I believe you, Harlan said. There was a pause that held something in it. Not quite acknowledgement, more the feeling of two people who've spent their lives reading rooms, reading each other and finding what they found. You'd start Thursday, Harlan said. I want you to meet Mr. Calloway before then. He prefers to know the people around him. That's wise, Tristan said. It is, Harlan agreed. He's a good man to work for. Exacting, but good. A pause. He'll probably want to meet your daughter, too. Tristan raised an eyebrow. He's like that, Harlan said, with something that was finally, unmistakably, a smile. They shook hands near the window over the Amber City, while below them a 7-year-old girl explained to a corporate facility coordinator why 6 legs were definitively better than 4, making her case with the precision and confidence of someone who had never once in her life doubted that her father was exactly who she believed him to be. On the drive home, Zoe sat in the back seat with Captain the Elephant buckled in beside her, both of them looking out the window at the city going dark around them. Dad, she said. Yeah, that big guy fell really fast. He did. A pause. Did it hurt him? No, Tristan said. I was careful. Another pause. Longer this time, the kind Zoe produced when she was turning something over in her mind and wanted to get the words exactly right before she let them out. Were you scared? She asked. He thought about the question. He thought about Harlan's eyes on him from the moment he walked in. He thought about Garrett's expression when he stood up from the mat. Not embarrassed, but recalibrated. He thought about Adrian with the clipboard, and the way the room had gone quiet, and the way the quiet had a texture to it that was different from the quiet of disbelief. He thought about Zoe's hands pressed over her mouth and her eyes going wide with the specific wonder of discovering something true about a person you love. No, he said honestly, I knew what I was doing. How did you know? Because I'd practiced a long time. Zoe was quiet for a minute. Then, I practice my spelling every day. You do, he said, so when I grow up I'll be really good at spelling. You'll be very good at spelling, Tristan agreed. She considered this. Maybe I'll protect someone too, she said, with the ease of someone making a reasonable long-term plan. But with spelling. Tristan looked at her in the rearview mirror. She wasn't looking back at him. She was watching the streetlights come on one by one as the car moved through them, each light blooming warm and brief before the next one appeared, a chain of small illuminations leading them home. He thought about what Harlan had said about negative presence. The thing that isn't noticed until it becomes the most important thing in the room. He looked at his daughter. All she'd done was sit in a chair and draw a 6-legged horse and ask one question in a clear, unafraid voice. Is my dad doing good? And somehow that had been the most important thing in the room. Yeah, he said quietly. Not to her, not to anyone in particular, just to the car in the dark and the streetlights going past. You'll be good at that, too. She was already asleep by the time they got home, Captain tucked under her arm. Her head tipped against the window at an angle that looked uncomfortable but clearly wasn't. Tristan carried her inside without waking her, which he'd gotten very good at over the years. The specific weight and stillness of a sleeping 7-year-old, the way she fit against his shoulder like she'd been designed for exactly that purpose. He laid her down, tucked the blanket up, set Captain in the crook of her arm where she could find him without waking. He stood in the doorway of her room for a moment and looked at her. The apartment was quiet. Outside, the city continued doing what cities do, the hum and the motion, the lights in other windows, the sounds of other lives going on in their own directions. But in here it was just this, his daughter sleeping, her breath slow and even, her face completely unguarded the way children's faces go when they're safe. He'd spent 6 years learning to read environments, rooms, situations, crowds, the language of what was actually happening beneath what appeared to be happening. He'd been good at it. Sandra Well had told him he was the best analyst she'd ever run, and Sandra Well didn't say things she didn't mean. But nothing he'd ever learned in any room in any building had prepared him for the simple, total clarity of standing in a doorway, looking at the one thing in the world he would move heaven and earth to protect. Knowing that tomorrow he would call Harlan Voss and confirm Thursday. Knowing that the job would be hard and the hours would be unreasonable, and some nights he'd be in cities he'd rather not be in, but knowing also that he would do every single part of it, because this was what it was all for. This small room, this quiet, this kid. He turned off the light and left her door open the way she liked it.